Welcome back, y'all. We are here with another episode of the Poddy. This is going to be an unusual one because not only am I by myself, it's also audio only. So I hope you've got your listening ears on because this episode is, it's kind of personal. You know, it's personal to me, and I feel like it affects quite a significant portion of the population of South Africa, you know, especially a lot of young black kids. And you know, it's something that I don't hear get talked about often for reasons that we'll get into. And I just wanted to kind of shine a light on it. But as always, you know, if you enjoy the episode, please like it. If you enjoy me, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Black Boy Joy. Every little bit of support helps. And, you know, put something nasty in the comments. I dare you. Yeah, so let's get into this. Today's episode is about receptive or passive bilingualism. And essentially what this is when you have enough exposure to a language and you get a native understanding of it, but you struggle to express yourself in that language, that is what is referred to as receptive or passive bilingualism. You know, it's kind of in the name. You're like, you can receive it, but you struggle to express yourself in it. So therefore you're a passive speaker of that language, even though you are a native speaker in another language. So in this episode, I kind of aim to go over what it is, how it comes about, you know, the historical context from which like such a thing arises from, and pretty much my own experiences with it and how I'm deciding to move forward in my life, dealing with the issues that come from it. And, you know, I'm hoping that this like reaches someone. I don't know who, but whoever else out there is kind of struggling with the existential L that this throws you for essentially your entire life. And I'm hoping that they don't have to wait till 25 to, you know, fix the issue that they're feeling. I'm hoping that they kind of, whoever this mythical person is, I'm hoping that they listen to it and they be like, damn, Tato, you know, that helps. I feel better. I don't feel like half of a black man anymore. Like, that's what I'm hoping for. So, I mean, let's get right into it, you know. To give an abridged version of South Africa's complicated history with language for like everybody out there that doesn't know, everybody that didn't go through the South African education system, especially because if you did, then this is going to sound like something you've heard before. You're probably going to phase out the moment I start saying Bantustan. Yeah. So, you know, African language speaking groups, they're typically the most socioeconomically deprived because of the apartheid system. You know, back then, under that system, groups of black people were split up, around South Africa into territories and regions that were referred to as Bantustans, and they were essentially split along language lines. But in urban areas, the languages of power, the languages of the state, the languages of education still remained Afrikaans and English. So the effects of that are still felt today because the language that you'll find most frequently spoken in an area will still be whatever the language of kind of that Bantustan was. You know, so if you go to the Eastern Cape, you'll find that 80% of the South Africans in the Eastern Cape speak Xhosa. But if you go to the Northwest, for example, you'll find that the majority of the people speak Tswana. If you go to KZN, 78% of the people there speak isiZulu. I mean, just out of interest, y'all, did you know like 75% of all statistics are made up? Yeah. No, but I promise the ones I said were actually real. I'm going to cite my sources in the in the description. So the current constitution of South Africa, woohoo, 96, 94, shout out. The current constitution says that everybody has the rights to receive education in their official languages. South Africa at present has 12. Shout out to Cyril for like officializing the fact that South African Sign Language is an official language of this country. Like, that is actually a really, really big milestone, and it's something that needs to be celebrated, because something like 4.5% of the population speaks South African Sign Language. I mean, they're deaf. They can't really speak anything else. But despite this fact, despite the fact that we have 12 languages in practice, you'll still likely find that the modes of education especially are in English and Afrikaans. The expression of societal power from these two groups is so significant, and they still hold the source of the majority of the economic and societal power, coming right out of these two groups. So it's actually really ironic that, like, throughout history, those two groups have actually been rivals. They've been enemies, but somehow what they've managed to still do is consolidate their power in the country while hating on each other. But hey, I don't know. Karma. Anyways, so the virus that's within Section 6 of the Constitution is the fact that even though all these official languages are given technically the same status, they've not been developed to the same level of higher functionality. A really good analogy that I saw come up was that you're placing boxers who are in various weight divisions into one single weight division to compete against one another. It's all good and well that there's 10 languages that there's 10 languages that are officially recognized as South African languages. But if they're not given the same level of institutional importance, then there's still going to be languages that essentially are preferred over others. This is where it gets interesting for me, because I have a Poddy father. I had a Tswana mom. I say had a Poddy father because he passed away, not because he stopped being Poddy. But yeah, so my father's Poddy, mother's Tswana, and they compromised in the house, and we speak Tswana at home. So I'm going to put it out front. Though my parents have very good grasps of various languages, I actually only speak English. Like, I can only natively speak English. And it's very interesting because my siblings aren't like that. My siblings have a very good grasp of their home languages. I mean, if you ask my brother won't say he speaks Tswana. He'll say he speaks Jozi. Because, if you speak any language that comes out of Joburg, you'll speak a bastardized version of it. But yeah, so I actually, and I've had kind of a deep feeling of shame that comes from this fact, from the fact that I don't speak my own mother tongue. It's been a very painful thing for me for pretty much my entire life. And I decided this year that I'm going to investigate it. So I went and I asked my mom, I asked my brother, I asked my sister, and I kind of wanted to get an understanding from their side as to what they think happened. And my mom explained it how she remembers it is that, we grew up, I wasn't born yet. My family grew up and they lived in an Afrikaans area. So my siblings had a very good grasp of Afrikaans and English, but they eventually were taken to a school that had black teachers, that had a lot of black students. It was a very culturally mixed bag. My siblings went and visited their grandparents a lot. That happened. And I think of what is really important is that my parents eventually decided to become pastors, and they planted themselves within a community in Soweto, in Meadowlands, and the community there spoke Tswana. So my brother decided to become a hood rat. My brother found a deep connection in Soweto. He had a lot of cousins our age there, so he started hanging out with them, and he really associated very deeply with the people that he met there. My sister, she went on to travel, but she also found a very deep connection with the people there. She started preaching, and funny enough, even though she found a very deep connection there, she has a much better grasp of Tswana than I do. She was still mocked for her language capabilities. When she would preach, she would be mocked because of how her Setswana sounded. And this brings me to my point, which is the shame that kind of arises from a black person's grasp of their language. So I grew up differently. My brother above me is 10 years older than me. My sister is 14 years older than me. So when I was born, my parents had established themselves a little bit more. We moved to a much wealthier neighborhood, which happened to be predominantly white. I went to the schools in my neighborhood. The people I associated with were culturally a very mixed bag. I had Indian friends, I had colored friends, I had black friends, I had white friends, but we all defaulted to English, but my teachers were white. It's actually fascinating because when I was in nursery school, I actually only spoke Tswana squarely, exclusively. That was it. And then as time went on, I started learning English, and that for some reason became my default language. And then my family would speak to me in Tswana, and then my father, in an effort, I guess, to not confuse me, because I would always respond in English, he was just like, no guys, don't bother him, don't worry about him, don't traumatize him, don't confuse him, just let him do him. I think our parents, they do what they feel is best for us. And I'm not going to criticize the decisions my parents made, because at the end of the day, they just want what's best for their children and their people too. And I think that's essentially what was happening, is that my father just did not want, like he said, to confuse his youngest child. But it ended up with repercussions that probably none of us saw coming. But when you retrospectively think about it, it was kind of obvious. Now I struggle to express myself in Tswana. And the way it works for me, right? The way it works for me is that a person could come up to me right now and speak Tswana to me, and I'd understand, and I'd respond in English, just like I did when I was a child. But what's interesting is that I cannot express myself. My mind literally goes blank when I even try to put together the sentence. I could literally try to repeat the sentence that person had just told me, but for some reason, the words won't come out. But now my parents' life didn't change. We still associated very deeply with the people in Meadowlands. We still visited family fairly often. But now I'm a child that doesn't speak Tswana. And unfortunately, everybody has their own reactions to adversity. And what I decided to do was hide away within myself. If I'm not comfortable in an environment, I will try my best to remove myself from that environment instead of becoming comfortable in it, instead of trying to adapt to it. So what ended up happening is that we would go to Meadowlands, and I also have a very strong personality. So instead of stumbling around trying to speak Tswana to people, the people at church would struggle to understand me speaking English. I'd struggle to understand them speaking Tswana. So instead, I just hung out with the people that allowed me to speak English. And if those people weren't there, I would rather be by myself. Because I'm sure anybody that struggles with their home language, which is a lot of black kids nowadays, not even just from South Africa, people from other regions, from Zim, from Malawi, I've heard it from a lot of different black kids that, my version of my language, my Shona, it isn't as authentic as everybody else's. It isn't as proper as my uncles, as my aunts. And therefore, whenever you try to speak it, they laugh. Whenever you try to speak it, there's this patronizing feeling that they instill in you because they look down on you for your grasp of the language. Nobody appreciates the fact that you try. Everybody wants to laugh at the fact that you didn't make it. It's cute in the moment. It's funny in the moment. But overall, after a long while, it kind of starts to chip away at your soul. You start to not want to engage, especially with those people, because you know how they're going to react. You know how they're going to make you feel. And there's no reason that you'd want to put yourself in that situation so you can keep feeling like that. So this led me to start feeling a very deep disconnection with my own cultural background, with my own familial background. Because if you want someone to truly express themselves, you have them speak and engage and express themselves in their home language, in their native tongue. And it's gotten to the point where I didn't even want to go to church. I hated it. I still have a lot of my own issues with church because I've never felt like such an outsider as when I was hanging with other black people from Soweto. It really did hurt, and nothing against anybody. Everybody's still learning. Everybody's still trying to figure themselves out. But it's how I felt. I hated church. I honestly still hate church for nothing, honestly, against their religion. I have my own academic criticisms, but churches are central parts of the black community, and it's just something I didn't want to engage in. I'd rather be in a space that I'm comfortable in, that I feel somewhat welcome in, that I'm not feeling rejected by. It didn't just come from people at church. It came from my own family members. I love my siblings to death. I love my mother. I love my father. Nothing changes about how I view them, but they weren't the most engaging. If you're shamed about something enough times, you learn to not bring up that thing. And my family, like I said, my father was like, oh, don't confuse the child. And that's fair. And my siblings really ran with that. But it didn't feel like I had anybody around me to engage with me about this. It didn't feel like there was anybody around me that understood it. Every black person that I would come across that would try to speak to me in any vernacular language now would always bring up those feelings of shame, those feelings of, I don't even understand my own mother. It felt like I understand about 70% of my mother and she understands about 70% of me. It felt like I would never truly get to know my mom. It feels like she would never truly get to know me. Why? Because there's this permanent language barrier between us, and like I said, those feelings get brought up every time any person tries to speak any kind of vernacular language to me. Especially because you don't just get it from people at church. You don't just get it from your family. It literally comes from randos as well. These random people, you say, oh, I'm sorry, I don't understand, or, oh, I'm sorry, I don't speak it. And these random people will start laughing at you. These random people will start feeling better than you. They will start patronizing you. They'll start laughing at you. And you're like, fam, I'm just trying to buy some dinner. Like, you're constantly getting these feelings of shame and these feelings of sadness, trauma, anger, all of these, this mixed bag of emotions. That's what's getting validated every time you even attempt to interact in your mother tongue, like I had said, there's only so much of my mother that I will ever understand. And like Cyril actually said on the commemoration of the Sharpeville massacre of all things, when a language dies, a way of understanding the world dies with it, and that very much comes in a sense of when languages that aren't spoken very much, but it also applies in situations where my mother speaks this language, so therefore she understands the world in this particular aspect. And I'd love to get an understanding of that aspect, I'd love to understand how she sees the world, but I can't because I can't engage her in that language, and what this led to is actually so interesting because, as much as there's these feelings of shame, disconnection, of all of that being like swirled around inside of you, what you end up when you grow up in a very white environment, especially, I think it's getting better now, but especially then, early 2000s type thing, is that there's kind of a superiority mindset that's almost inbuilt in English. Like I had said, the socioeconomic power still comes from English, from Afrikaans. Those are still the two most economically powerful languages. And therefore, for a very, very long time, there was a feeling that if you had a good grasp of English, it was the determining factor in your level of intelligence. And you know what? I'm not going to lie. I enjoyed that clout. I enjoyed it. Everybody kind of takes me seriously the moment they hear me because I speak well. And that's just a product of the fact that my parents could get me into some schools that taught me English really well. And I read a lot. I just engaged in things that developed my language ability in English in particular. That's just the benefit of that. But I enjoyed this kind of superiority. I enjoyed the fact that, you know what? As an English speaker, at least I'm a damn good English speaker. And it's funny, these negative feelings about my home language, they started filtering out in ways, because you can only put a lid on shame and trauma for so long before it starts spilling out in ways that are uncontrollable and a little violent, not physically violent, but a little like vitriolic to the area around you. There was a point, and, I hate to say it, but there was a point because, I grew up a whitewashed kid. I grew up a coconut. That's what everybody says. I grew up like that. So there was a point where I felt ashamed of the way my mother spoke. I felt ashamed, because these lessons are so deeply ingrained into me at this point. I've had no other exposure. I've had no other education base for myself. It's just the people I associate with are smashing these ideas into my head about what it means to be an intelligent black person, about what it means to be a superior black person, about what it means to be one of the good ones, And it leads to a whole lot of things that after a while, you have to really go out of your way to unlearn. I eventually got so insecure about my own language capabilities, about my own perception as a black man, that what happened is that I started picking on people that I deemed less black than me. I wanted to affirm my own black identity by finding people that I thought almost deserved to be attacked for their lack of blackness, ironically. I was like, oh wow, I am such a low bar on what it means to be a black man that if they're whiter than me, that means they're not even trying. That means they just hate their blackness. They need to be blacker, and I mean, this entire episode for me is about reaffirming that what our ancestors fought for, what we are fighting for, is not so that we can be a specific type of black person, but so that we can be any kind of black person, that we can be any type of person and still be a proud black man, that there is no barrier or boundary to what that means. Like I said, I got really insecure about this, and I started finding kids that had Yabru accents, that had relaxed hair and comb overs, and I started picking on them. And especially when I got into university, because, I had a lot of white friends growing up, and there's only so much you can do because there's not a lot of black people in white areas typically. I think we were probably the first black people that moved into my neighborhood. So, there weren't too many black people in general there. But once I got into varsity, I started making a lot more black friends. Those were essentially the only kinds of people I surrounded myself with. And those black people enjoyed denouncing the blackness in other black people. Say you have a comb over like that. Say you support the DA. whatever it is that they deemed as less than what we were. And like, in order to affirm my own blackness, I started going along with that and I started hating on them. And you know what? And I think I started attacking them so hard because I could honestly relate. I could see myself in those black people, and I just didn't like what I was seeing. You know, I didn't like the fact that these people were struggling with what I'm struggling with, and therefore I guess I was essentially projecting onto them. And it's really painful to look back on, and I feel so terrible for what I was doing, because I was just projecting my insecurities onto them. Now I've grown, now I've realized that you really can be whatever type of black person you want to be. But now I'm 25 and I still feel a similar sense, how I feel even more disconnected from my own community than I did back then. I think the only thing that's gotten better is the fact that now that I'm in Cape Town as opposed to Johannesburg, I have a very good excuse for not speaking the native language. I don't speak Xhosa because I'm not Xhosa. I've had no exposure to Xhosa. Even though I've been here for 7 years, I kind of refuse to learn Xhosa. Why? Because Zulu and Xhosa people kind of always assume that other people should speak their language, and therefore I've kind of got my own little proud stance against it. But that's topic for a different episode. Getting back to my point is that now, you know, I felt less ashamed because, you can't expect me to speak Xhosa because I'm not, you know. But then when I go back to Joburg, the same feelings still come up. And now it's even worse in Joburg because now I'm in control of my time. I don't have to go to church. Why would I go to church? I always feel like those people made me feel excluded, so I'm not going to go. You know, now I'm hanging even more. But now that I'm 25, I've realized these feelings of insecurity aren't just going to go away. I've put a lid on it for so long, and I've gotten so extremely tired of it, the exhaustion that it brings me, because it is mentally draining. You know, it's like an existential crisis. I'm having an identity crisis for essentially the last 20 years of my life. And I kept thinking that it would get better, that it would go away. But I've come to the point where I've realized with a lot of things in my life, not even just with this, but this is a major a major contributor, is that this won't change unless I make it change. And how it changes, that part is completely up to me. So what I've decided to do, you know, is I've sat down and I've decided, because, you know, as you can really go your entire life without learning an African language. There's like 30% of the population that doesn't speak an African language, and they're thriving. But I've made the decision myself, the conscious decision, that I want to sit down and actually learn Setswana. That's what I want to do, because it makes me feel like I'm making an effort towards fixing and solving those issues within me. Do you get what I mean? Like, other people can only help you so far. Other people can only reaffirm you and validate you so far. I know that I'm enough. I've come to that realization that I'm enough, that there's nothing other people can say about me that will change that. You know, I still have people laughing at the fact that I struggle to speak my home language. And it's okay. You know, I think what I've done is, on one hand, I've kind of hardened my heart against it. Like, I don't let that stuff hurt me anymore. I'm a lot more confident in who I am as a person. I'm confident in my masculinity. I'm confident in my blackness. I know who I am. I know what I am, and nothing anybody says will change that. But what I want is the feelings inside of me to change, to get better, to heal. You know, I want that to change. So I've decided to learn Tswana myself, because I want to do it for me, not for anybody else at this point. I don't want to do it so that people will stop laughing at me. I don't want to do it so that I feel more connected to the community. I want to do it so that I feel like it's not an issue that I need to deal with anymore. And I mean, that's how I'm approaching it. You know, I know there's a lot of other people that are dealing with this. And I mean, if you have other methods of dealing with this, you know, put them down in the comments, because I'd actually love to see other people's journeys on this. Funny enough, I've kind of tried to research this. I spent a while researching this, but I don't find a lot of answers. You know, when it brings up bilingualism in South Africa, there's a lot of resources in education about why bilingualism is a benefit, and typically it relates to things in English and Afrikaans. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of research into, or at least not that I could find. I mean, I'm not a linguistics student. A lot of research into this specifically, especially in a South African context, you know, but I want to see what other people's journeys like, because, for example, I know there are a lot of people that aren't from South Africa that are based in South Africa, and they face an entirely different struggle in the fact that Black South Africans assume they speak a South African vernacular language and then are almost offended when that person doesn't. And I know it brings up its own feelings. I have friends that get very angry about it. I have friends that, you know, they fear for their safety. We've got a very big xenophobia problem in South Africa. And therefore it not being able to speak any South African language brings up its own issues. But funny, I feel like it comes from the same source of Black South Africans feeling, I want to say patriotic, but patriotic is not the right word, because you can be patriotic and not a terrible person. But it comes from the same source of Black people being almost proud in their language and then questioning why you don't speak said language. And, you know, you might have your own reasons for not speaking said language. So I'd love to hear other people's journeys, opinions. Put that down in the comments right underneath your nastiness. But just like I said, that's how I've approached this. And I mean, I'm still on my journey. I've only decided about 3-4 months ago to start learning Tswana, and, you know, it's essentially for me like learning a new language. Like, as much as my comprehension is really, really good, my actual speaking, writing ability isn't. You know, I don't know the grammatical rules, or at least not off the top of my head. I can sometimes understand that, a sentence makes sense in this manner, but I can't tell you why. And therefore, and if I can't tell you why, I can't put together a sentence coherently. So, you know, learning a new language essentially takes a really, really long time, but I'm really excited to put in this effort because it feels like it will make a difference to myself at some point in the future. So that's my experience with receptive bilingualism. You know, it's something that I've been contemplating for a really long time. I've actually wanted to make this episode for a minute, y'all, for a minute. I'm hoping to keep going in this journey because, you know what, as much as I think I could live the rest of my life without learning another language, it feels like it'd be doing a disservice to me, you know. I want to learn it. I kind of want to have a deeper connection with my family, with the people around me. I want to understand them better. I feel so much love from my immediate family, from my extended family, you know, flaws and all, you know, and people aren't blessed like that. My own sister has a much more tenuous relationship with, you see, big English. My own sister has a much more tenuous relationship with our extended family than I do. But, you know, I still feel that love from, for example, my mom's siblings and my cousins and all of that. Not because of, but almost in spite of my capabilities and my flaws, you know, and I guess I just want to be able to experience that love firsthand in the language they'd prefer. I guess to answer a couple questions that I imagine might come up while people are listening to this, why am I choosing to learn Tswana over Poddy, is because I am a mama's boy. I spent a lot more time with my mother's family than I did with my father's, and therefore it's just the language that I feel motivated to learn. I might pick up Poddy in future. You know, there's nothing preventing me from doing that, but right now this just feels like the right move personally. You know, I can't really give a better answer than that. So thank you so much for listening to me ramble, to listen to me vent, to listen to my story. I hope it reaches someone. I hope it touches someone. I hope it makes sense. This is, like I said, this is something I've been struggling with for a really, really long time, and it feels really cathartic to get it out there. And I'm hoping from this that it just reaffirms to everybody, this is like my ultimate goal, is that you are who you are, and it's okay to be who you are. It's okay to make the decisions you've made, and the only person whose feelings you need to worry about are your own. No matter what anybody else says, it doesn't take away from how black you are, from how much of a man you are, from how much of your own person that you are. There's a lot of things that make me not beat the gay allegations, but I don't care, because I love what I love, and therefore it doesn't really matter how people view me. It doesn't matter whether people view me as less of a man, as less of a black person, because I feel like I'm exactly the type of person that I needed to be, that I wanted to be, that people in frickin' the 60s during the Defiance campaign fought for. They didn't fight for me to be a farmer in the Northwest like my grandparents. No, they fought for me to be sitting here behind a microphone talking about the fact that me not speaking my native language doesn't make me less of a black person. And that feeling actually gives me so much reassurance, And I always just think to myself that what I want for my kids is just for them not to have to go through the same struggles that I did. That's my biggest goal. I will struggle so that they don't have to. And they will eventually, because I think my parents feel that same way. So I'm hoping that by putting this out there, there's just somebody else that doesn't have to struggle, or at least struggles a little less. Either way, thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Poddy. As always, it was lovely being here. It's your boy Fluke Fighter behind the mic once again. Yeah, I just, we went from heartfelt to turning on the skr. Please, again, like, share, subscribe, put something nasty down in the comments, because I will be back. I will be back to bless your ears, to bother your ears once again sometime soon. Thank you so much for being a part of this journey with me. Love y'all.